Summary of the Biography of Confucius. Part 2. Sources on Confucius. Sources on the life of Confucius are sparse. Official annals and other historical sources of the late spring and autumn period rarely mention his name because he did not play a conspicuous role in the political world. In fact, he barely existed in that world, since most of his life was spent either in preparation for such a career or in exile. Yet the gaps in the historical records were eventually beneficial, because they prompted later scholars to look for any trace of evidence that might reveal something new about him. Unfortunately, such searches often led to imaginative conjectures about Confucius, as in the account by a writer of the 3rd century BCE in which Confucius described himself as a yellow-kai homeless dragon swimming in the turbid water but drinking from the clear. Confucius, in this writer's mind, could have chosen to live like a true dragon and never leave his pristine pool, but he preferred to be a kai. Throughout early Chinese history, there were many such writers, and the source they turned to repeatedly for understanding and inspiration was the Analects. The Analects is the work most closely associated with Confucius. It is a record of his life in fragments, collected into 20 sections. The sections contain descriptions of his character, deportment, and moments of his life in exile or at home in lieu. Bits of conversations he had with his disciples and other people he knew, and remarks spoken in his voice, but often in the absence of a context, without the aid of commentaries. This work, which also lacks any apparent organization, can be misleading or discouraging for some readers. Yet, with patience and attentiveness, it is possible to glean from the gathered pieces flashes of Confucius's genius and the elements of his humanity. The Analects probably took shape within the 1st century. After Confucius's death, a handful of younger disciples, who make their appearances rather forcefully at the beginning and the end of the work, could have initiated the project. But it took another 200 to 300 years of tinkering with some passages being omitted and others appended or modified before the text settled into its present form. Material evidence of the age of the standard text emerged from the ground in 1973, when archaeologists opened the tomb of the Prince of Zhongshan Liuzu, also known as King Huai, a relative of the Han Emperor Wudi. The tomb, dated to 55 BCE, was discovered in Hebei province about 100 miles south of Beijing. The Analects, written on bamboo strips, was included among the grave objects that accompanied the prince to his afterlife. A second work that is central to the study of Confucius and his thought is the Zuo commentary, although it is a commentary on the Qufu, the official annals of the state of Lu. Covering the spring and autumn period, it does more than provide background and narrative structure for the events listed chronologically in the annals. The Zuo writer probably had at his disposal a wide range of scribal records, the most important of which were speeches of rulers and counselors and of men and women who had played a role in the political fate of their families and their states during the late Zhou dynasty. The best of these speeches reflect the characters of the speakers and the cultural practices that guided their moral decision-making. They also throw light on Confucius's intellectual ancestry and the roots of his moral thinking. Confucius never professed to be an original thinker. He said, "I transmit but do not innovate. I love antiquity and have faith in it." Analects 7-1. The Zhuozuan offers a view of China in the 200 years before Confucius's birth, which was not the antiquity Confucius had in mind. But when one reads it together with the early classics on rights, see below teachings of Confucius, poetry, and history, it can take one to the knowledge that Confucius intended to transmit. The third source is a long biography of Confucius, written in the 1st century BCE. The author, Sima Jin, is China's most distinguished historian, and the biography remains the standard in Chinese historiography, even though later scholars did not find all his stories believable and saw logistical problems in his account of Confucius's travels. They were willing to overlook such questions because of Sima Jin's rare talent for improving the records imaginatively and reconstructing the interior lives of his subjects. In his biography of Confucius, Sima Jin tried to work mostly with the analects, grouping individual utterances together to make them cohere, and expanding isolated episodes by adding more characters and action. The biography was not altogether elegant or persuasive, but it was the earliest attempt to thread together into a continuous narrative the fragments in the analects and the stories about Confucius that had been circulating through the works of historians and philosophers in the 300 years since his death. Teachings of Confucius. Confucius thought that the rites, or ritually encompassing and expressing proper human conduct, in all spheres of life could steady a man and anchor a government, and that their practice should begin at home. Give your parents no cause for worry other than your illness. He said, when your parents are alive, do not travel to distant places. And if you have to travel, you must tell them exactly where you are going. Analects 226 for 19. But what if your parents are thinking of doing something wrong? Be gentle when trying to dissuade them from wrongdoing. Confucius advised, if you see that they are inclined not to heed your advice, remain reverent. Jing. Do not openly challenge them. Do not be resentful even when they wear you out and make you anxious. Analects for 18. Every human relationship is a balancing act, and the one between child and parents is the most demanding, yet the most deserving of attention and patience, because it is rooted in love and the child's earliest memories of warmth and affection. Confucius did not want children to be acquiescent in situations that call for their judgment. At the same time, he discouraged confrontation even when the parents are culpable. He worried that parents might lose their sense of proportion and their child's affection for them, and so he urged the child to remain reverent, even if the parents are not inclined to heed the child's advice. The rites, therefore, enable the child to avoid a clash without having to betray principles. But unless the child acts according to the spirit of the rites, in being respectful, he will tire himself out, and being cautious, he will become timid. Analects 8-2. In the eyes of his contemporaries, Confucius was someone who embodied that spirit. They observed that at court, when he was speaking with the counselors of the lower rank, he was relaxed and affable. When speaking with counselors of the higher rank, he was frank but respectful. And in the ruler's presence, though he was filled with reverence and awe, he was perfectly composed. Analects 10-2. The spirit of the rites is the ineffable and, therefore, different from prescribed rules. It awaits the person with knowledge and awareness and skills in deportment to put it into motion. For every occasion is different, the circumstances change. And they change even as the occasion unfolds. Thus, when Confucius was inside the temple of the Duke of Zhou, he asked questions about everything. He knew the procedures of the sacrifice, yet he still approached the rites as if he were performing them for the first time. Asking questions, he said, is the correct practice of the rites Analects 315. An education in the odes. The earliest collection of Chinese poetry complements an education in the rites. The odes can give the spirit exhortation, the mind keener eyes. Confucius said, they can make us better adjusted in a group, and more articulate when voicing a complaint. Analects 17-9. He told his son, unless you learn the odes, you won't be able to speak. Analects 16-13. Just as the legendary sage Emperor Shunxi, 23rd century BCE, told the director of music to teach the children poetry, to let the poems become their voice, so that the straightforward shall yet be gentle, the magnanimous shall yet be dignified. Confucius, too, hoped that the odes would become his son's speech, because such utterances are always appropriate and so will never swerve from the path. Analects 222. For him, a love poem from the odes, called Guanju Fish Hawk, best illustrates this point. The poem tells the reader that in yearning for the woman he desired, the wooer did not suffer unduly, and in courting his lady, he did not make a vulgar display of his feelings. The poem reads, with harps we bring her company, and with bells and drums do her delight. Of the tone and sentiment in this poem, Confucius said, there is joy but no immodest thoughts, sorrow but no self-injury. Analects 320. The music Confucius loved best was the ancient music known as Shao. When he first heard it, he said, I never imagined that music could be this beautiful. And for the next 3 months, he did not notice the taste of meat. Analects 7:14. The music of Shao is associated with the story of how Shun ascended to power upon the decision of Emperor Yaozi, 24th century BCE, Shun's predecessor, to abdicate in favor of a man who grew up in the wilds, but whose love for virtue was like the rush of a torrent. According to the Shujing, a compilation of documents related to China's early history, when the music was played in the court of Emperor Shun, not only men but gods and spirits, birds and beasts were drawn to it. Such was the power of music that embodied the tenor and vehicle of a moral government. Whereas Confucius looked upon music as the culmination of culture of notes bright and distinct gathering in fluency and harmony, the Confucian philosopher Mencius c. 371 to 89 BCE took the idea in another direction, seeing it as a trope of Confucius's achievements. Analects 323. In the work most closely associated with him, the Mencius, Mencius said that only Confucius could advance or retreat, serve or not serve according to circumstances and in a timely fashion, and like a symphony, perfectly brought together. From the ringing of bells at the beginning to the sound of the jade tubes at the end, there was an internal order. Mencius 5b1. The order found in the music of Shao or in the conduct of a person suggests the ultimate good, but it is not an abstract idea, for it effects an emotional pull gravitating toward the music or the person possessing it. It has a kind of magic because it reflects a rightness in sound or in human deliberation, and this rightness of expression or intent serves a higher ideal, which Confucius called humanus ren. When his disciple Zigong asked him, "What is humaneness?" Confucius replied, "Do not impose on others what you do not want others to impose on you." Analects 1524. A humane man is someone who is able to make analogies from what is close at hand. Analects 630. He uses this knowledge to imagine the humanity in others, and he relies on his learning of rites and music to hold him to the right measure. Confucius was often asked whether someone was humane, and in response he always gave a careful assessment of the person's strengths. He would say, for example, that the man did his best in fulfilling his public duty, had administrative talents, or wanted nothing to defile him, but such virtue, he would add, did not imply that the man was humane. Analects 5-8, 519. In fact, Confucius claimed that he had never met anyone who was truly humane. This, however, did not mean that humaneness was beyond reach. "As soon as I desire humaneness, it is here," he said, and everyone he had come across had sufficient strength to devote all his effort to the practice of humaneness. Analects 730 for 26. Humaneness is beautiful, and most people are drawn to it. Yet, Confucius observed, few will choose to pursue it. Analects for 21 for 26. That resistance suggests a rich and more complex notion of human nature, without which morality could not come into play. And as his disciple Zhengzi 505-36 BCE said, "Only the strong and resolute are game for the quest, because the road is long and ends only with death." Analects 8-7. Confucius gave his teachings on humaneness a political dimension, though they seem to be intended for the self. He observed that Emperor Shun was able to order the world simply by perfecting his own humanity and by cultivating a respectful demeanor. If you set an example by correcting your mistakes, who dares not to correct his mistakes? He asked the counselor Ji Kongi, "Just desire the good and the people will be good. The character of those at the top is like that of the wind. The character of those below is like that of grass. When wind blows over the grass is sure to bend." Analects 1217, 1219. But when asked what should come first when administrating a state, he said, "Trust Shin." If a ruler's words and actions do not inspire trust, Confucius asserts, his government will certainly perish, even though he might ensure enough food to feed the people and adequate arms to defend them. Analects 12-7. Confucius thought that the classic enfeoffment system of the early Zhou dynasty came very close to an ideal government, because it was grounded in the trust between the Zhou emperor in the west and the relatives he sent east with vested authority to create new colonies for the young empire. Such a government, reinforced with the civilizing powers of rites and music, does not need complex laws and edicts to keep the people in check. Confucius said, "Guide the people with ordinances and statutes and keep them in line with threats of punishment. They will try to stay out of trouble, but will have no sense of shame. If you guide them with exemplary virtue and keep them in line with the practice of the rites, they will have sense of shame and will know to reform themselves." Analects 2-3. Few people knew how to reform themselves in Confucius's time, and there was nearly no one among their rulers for them to look up to. But Confucius still had faith in professional advisors like himself, who, in the tradition of the great counselors of the past, were able to make rulers great with their hard work, discernment, and deft ways of moral suasion.